Hey Techno Studs, in my last video we talked about a lot of ways that people can leverage vulnerabilities in your network to attack your network. In this video, what we're going to do is we're going to cover securing your network, how to mitigate against some of those vulnerabilities. In this video, we're going to start out by talking about zero trust and what zero trust means. And that leads into talking about defense in depth, although I'm not going to get in depth into it because we've already talked about it in another video, so I'm just going to mention that. We're going to get into physical security, network access control, port security, and talk about those aspects of securing your network. I'm going to mention segmentation and AAA because we've talked about it in another video, but I'll mention it, re-mention it here. Then we'll talk about network hardening. We'll talk about securing your management traffic. We'll talk about segmenting management traffic. We'll talk about intrusion detection systems and intrusion prevention systems. We'll get into screen subnets, and then we'll end up with talking about honeypots. Zero trust is the concept that we assume that anybody can plug into your network and have access to your network. And you base your security on that anybody could plug into your network. And so what we have here is we have a firewall sitting on the outside, which we typically would have, to protect so that hackers couldn't get into your system. That firewall helps prevent people from getting into your system. And traditionally, we always thought that this was a safe zone in here, that people could not access this zone because we had the firewall on the front end of this. But the zero trust understands that no, this network is not safe, that it is all open. And it is open because people can plug into the ports and get onto your equipment. Or it's open because if you have a wireless connection, wireless access points that people can connect into there and hack those wireless access points. And there are ways that people can leverage holes in your firewall to get into your network and start leveraging the network. Or there's a lot of other ways machines on your network can be compromised. So the idea behind this is that you don't trust any of the machines that plug into your network, and you must validate those machines. You must make sure that whatever plugs in is supposed to be plugged in, and then there's a continuous validation that happens, that it's not just a one time you plug it in and then you're fine. No, it in fact tests every once in a while to make sure that you're still acceptable for you to plug into the network. So this is the idea of zero trust is that that any device is going to be validated if you plug into the network, and you just assume that you're going to have people trying to plug into your network that shouldn't be plugging into your network. That also leads into this defense in depth concept here, and that is that we want to put in multiple barriers because it might not just be somebody externally that's trying to get into your network that's stopped at the firewall, but it could be somebody sitting in your network internally. And so what mechanisms do you have in place to monitor, to make sure nothing is lost, to encrypt things, a security guard to make sure that things are not taken? So you have multiple steps that have to be broken in order for things to be stolen or things to be compromised. So this is the idea of a defense in depth. I'm also going to mention physical security. We're not going to get real in depth into physical security within this course, but it is something that you definitely need to think about when you're talking about security, and a very important part of security. And so physical security, we have a lot of technological security that we put in place to secure our data, but there we actually do need to put up walls around, literal walls around our technology. And we need to have locked doors, and we need to have locked cabinets, and we need to make sure not just that it's protected against hackers, because remember, security takes a much broader view, but we need to have backup generators in case the power goes out. We need to have our facilities, your equipment needs to be off the ground in case there's any kind of flooding that happens. You need to have a fire suppression system to make sure that if there's a fire, that the fire gets put out quickly. So you need a physical security around your equipment and around your data. Then we have a set of technologies that allow network access control. So the idea behind network access control is to control the access to the network. just like the name suggests. So what does that mean though? So if I have a computer and I'm going to plug it into this network right here, that this switch doesn't automatically just allow this computer to have access to everything. Perhaps it goes through some sort of check. Perhaps it's a verification of what computer this is, or maybe it's a verification of what user is using this computer before it allows on the network. Perhaps it is also going to do some sort of check to say, hey, is your OS up to date? Are your patches all up to date? Is your antivirus all up to date? So making sure that everything is up to date on this computer before allowing it on its network. And each one of those levels that I just mentioned, whether it's patching or antivirus or user authentication or machine authentication, has different levels and different protocols that can help install this or help facilitate this. So really what network access control is a set of protocols and a set of procedures that are working together to identify if a machine should be allowed to plug into the network or not. Where network access control can be wireless, or it could be VPN in, or whether it could be you physically plug into the port. Port security has to do with the individual ports themselves. And so each port, we can actually program that port for certain port security mechanisms to allow or deny traffic from certain machines. And so what we can do with port security is pretty broad, from, like I say, as I mentioned before, if a machine plugs in, it can do authentication against the machine or the user. And before it turns on the port, it does some basic turning on the port, but isolates the port and verifies that the user can get on the network before it allows that computer to get onto the network. But it also can do things like take a look at MAC address and do MAC address filtering, or make sure that we talked about in our last video, there's a bunch of IP spoofing or DHCP spoofing, DHCP rogue routers, or excuse me, rogue DHCP servers on your network. So it can look at the actual traffic that's coming across those different interfaces and start filtering based off of those, based off of that traffic. So this is port security, and port security can be set up on your switches to allow or deny either certain traffic or allow or deny certain machines onto the network. Segmentation is one of those things that can happen at multiple layers. It doesn't have to happen at the network layer, but it can happen at other layers as well. But in this example right here, I do have it where each of these departments here have their own networks, and it's one example of segmentation. And then also with the resources they have could be further segmented into here, and we can have role-based access control, and there's ways that we can segment even those resources. So segmentation is something that we should be doing on our networks from a subnet standpoint and from a switch standpoint, but also from different resources. So it should happen at multiple layers here. We also have that AAA, that authentication. Who are you? Are you who you say you are? Verifying who you are. Authorization. What are you, now that I know who you are, what are you authorized to access? And then finally, accounting. How can I go back and verify what resources you accessed so that way I can go back and do accounting on that? And that's essentially creating logs for when you log into certain resources. So this is the AAA, and this is one thing that we will also want to implement on our networks to one degree or another. To mitigate these vulnerabilities, also just hardening your equipment and your network is also really important. Going to each one of your machines that you have on your network and going through a process of hardening that equipment to make sure that it's not susceptible, making sure that things are patched on a regular basis. And not just the OS or the firmware, but actually getting on, and the software that's running on those machines need to be patched as well. So this also happens at multiple layers here, that you need to harden your equipment and harden your networking, because once again, remember that the equipment comes with trying to be functional, at least at a certain level, so that you're happy with the equipment, but some of that stuff that automatically is turned on and allows it to operate straight out of the box also opens up some security vulnerabilities if you're not using it. And so make sure that you go through hardening your equipment and your network to protect yourself against outside threats. Secure your management traffic. There is some information that goes back and forth between your devices that you may not want broadcasted out to all of the devices. For instance, some of your switches may be running something like Cisco Discovery Protocol, which is a Cisco protocol that allows it to discover other devices on the network and communicate with other devices. Now, the problem with that is, let's say you have a lot of devices that don't need to have that CDP turned on, then what that does is it allows somebody to plug in and start seeing what other equipment is on the network and start mapping out your network. So when you secure your management traffic, it's going in there. Another example of this would be there is a simple network management protocol, SNMP. So SNMP is network traffic management traffic that goes back and forth between devices, so that way you can start recording what's going on your network, and that also should be secured. So when you're securing your and hardening your network, make sure you take a look at your management traffic and secure the management traffic. One way to do that is to segment the admin traffic onto its own network. So here we have the admin network right here, different from administration. Administration is the department. Admin traffic is the traffic that you use to manage your equipment. So in this example right here, I set up a 192.168.99.0 network that has all of the hardware and the management of that hardware. It's got its own set of keys, own set of servers, own set of documents, and that it is segmented from all of the other networks. So this is one way you can segment that admin traffic, and that's one way that you can secure that admin traffic. One thing you should think about implementing is an IDS or IPS system. IDS is intrusion detection system. IPS is intrusion protection system. They're essentially the same thing with one big difference. One just detects if there's some sort of intrusion, while the other prevents intrusions. So let's talk about IDS first. So I'm going to be setting this up most likely on my firewall. So wherever my firewall's at, that's most likely where I would set up some sort of IDS, IPS system onto it. So the IDS, intrusion detection system, if somebody is outside your network and leveraging to get into your network, then what this firewall will do is recognize that. It will detect that intrusion detection system. And then what it will do is it will flag that, okay, now you have somebody here that's trying to access your network, and this is the behavior that we're seeing. So then you have intrusion protection system. And once again, the big difference between these two is an intrusion prevention system then will do something about it. Rather than just logging it and then flagging it and setting notifications on it, an intrusion prevention system will actually start blocking the traffic and doing something about that traffic that's coming in. Now, one reason why you'd want to do just a detection rather than jump straight to the prevention is there might be some legitimate traffic that's coming in, and this is just AI that's trying to determine what is illegitimate traffic. And if it starts blocking legitimate traffic, that can be a problem. So that's where you'd use an intrusion detection system, but also intrusion prevention system that can help mitigate an issue before it ever starts, where intrusion detection system that could already be too late by the time you actually respond to it. So there's pros and cons to using each one. In this network right here, I have a firewall that's protecting this network from people getting into this network. However, there are times when we want outside traffic. In fact, we want to encourage outside traffic to come in. And what I mean by that is we have a web server sitting off here to the side, and we want people to be able to get to our web server. So we want port 80 to be able to get into there. And so we need to poke a hole in our firewall so that users can come into our network and be able to access our web server. And so what we can do is we can set up a screened subnet or a demilitarized zone. So a DMZ or screened subnet is a separate network off to the side that we're going to allow a little bit of traffic into so that outside users can access the resources that we want them to access. So now what's nice about this is then we never have to poke any holes or do anything to our internal network. So our internal network, where all of our employees are sitting, never has to be open to the outside world. And so therefore, what users can do is they can access the screen network, and the resources are in the screen network, and then our employees sit back here and then access the resources they need, and those resources then are not open to the outside world, and no one can get in from the outside world into our more secure network. Essentially, it's segmenting our less secure networks and our more secure networks. So that is a screened subnet or a DMZ. We can also set up a honeypot. What a honeypot is something that's going to be enticing to a hacker. What it is it is a separate network off to the side that has the ability that hackers can get into and start exploring. And it looks like, from a hacker perspective, it looks like a full network, but it is just a facade. It's just fake equipment that's running there as a decoy to lure attackers in, so that way this firewall can analyze the traffic and see who is trying to hack the network and what they're trying to hack and what they're looking for. So it's a way to identify hackers that are trying to get into the system and lure them into the system without opening up the rest of your network to that attack or to that risk that is out there, to that threat that's out there. There you have it, a lot of information about securing your network. We started out by talking about zero trust, the idea that you just assume anybody can be in your building and connect into your network, and that you're not going to automatically assume that whoever's in your building and connecting into your network is safe. So you're going to have zero trust. We talk about defense in depth, not just putting something around the perimeter and calling it good, but assuming that you have both internal and external threats. And so you need multiple layers of defense to protect your network. We also talked about physical security, making sure you have locking doors, locking cabinets, and you're securing your equipment from any kind of physical harm. We talked about network access control along the lines of zero trust. When machines plug into your network, making sure that they have all of the equipment, all of the firmware, all the OS, everything's patched and up to date, making sure the antivirus is patched and up to date, making sure that machine is even supposed to be on the network. So network access control. One of the ways you can do that is port security. So when a machine plugs into your network, then it can analyze and say, hey, is this machine supposed to be on my network? And so port security happens at the switch level. When you plug into the switch, then the port on that switch says, is this machine supposed to be on this network? We talked about segmentation, taking your network and dividing it up into segments. We do that also within maybe the folders within network shares, and we do this at multiple layers, but one of those layers is from a networking standpoint. We talked about authentication, authorization, and accounting, a way to make sure you are who you say you are, see what resources you have access to, and then keeping some sort of log about that. Then we talk about network equipment hardening, making sure that when you unpackage something that is supposed to function directly out of the box. And so if you do that, though, what will happen is you may be implementing, you may be setting up things from an insecure manner. So you need to go through network hardening to make sure that equipment is up to date and that there are not extra services running on it, and that we harden that equipment. Then we talked about securing management traffic. That you have things like SNMP that goes across your network, and you're going to need to make sure that traffic can't be captured by other devices, so they can start seeing what's happening on your network. Then we talked about segmenting that management traffic, actually putting it on a whole separate subnet. And so we couldn't do that, and that's part of that securing the management traffic. Then we talked about intrusion detection system and intrusion protection system. Intrusion detection to detect if there's been an intrusion, a suspected intrusion into your system. And then intrusion protection does the same thing, except for it takes it a step further and then blocks that traffic. We talked about a screen subnet or a DMZ, which is sitting off to the side, allows users from outside your organization to access certain resources without exposing the rest of your network. And finally, we talked about a honeypot, something that's enticing to a hacker. The hacker thinks that he's actually hacking into the actual network, and you can be observing what's happening and how they are going about hacking into the network. So the honeypot will be something that's enticing them to get into there so you can analyze that traffic. So there's several ways there that we mentioned about securing your network, and you'll want to make sure that you're taking that defense in-depth approach and taking a lot of these different steps to making sure that your network is secure. If you like this video, could you hit that like button?